I think steampunk is a fascinating world. But there's a surprisingly little amount of steampunk movies or video games. The more I like scenarios like in The Order 1886 that inspired me to create my own steampunk world. After a story was outlined and written, I started breaking down what sets will be needed to place the scenes in. The headquarters, where Victoria is receiving her mission, should look dusty with a lot of stuff standing around and a big window letting light beams through. As I wanted to show an outside shot of the headquarters as well, and knowing that there will be some shots of the city later on, I made some buildings and assembled them in different ways to create the illusion of a few streets of a big city. It was fun to imagine little storefronts and what goods they might sell, but I also needed to be careful to not lose myself into too much detail, as they would only briefly be seen. The watchmaker should be seen in her laboratory to give a brief idea who this person is. The idea is that her lab was built in a clock tower and we can see the clock hands from the inside. The Royal Harbour, the main station where the airships arrive and depart, was supposed to be the highlight, and I fiddled with the design for a long time until finding something I was happy with. I especially like the big wheel being driven by a mountain river, generating the electricity to run the station. I split up the station into separate sections, making it easier to handle the big file and also being able to repeat some assets across the scene. As a part of the story was set inside the main hall, where Victoria and the watchmaker will depart with the airship. I created the hall as its own set piece, inspired by a Victorian train station. Although it would barely be seen in the final movie, I populated the hall with a lot of details like ticket offices, clocks, benches and flower pots, luggage and workers and people in the background. The file got so heavy that I could not link it into the main file with the Royal Harbour, but needed to create a slimmed down version of it for the full overview shot where we see the airship departing. Afterwards, we witnessed the pirates boarding their own ship in a secret hangar in another part of the harbour, where I wanted to achieve the feeling of a dusty warehouse. I placed a volume box in the center and punched holes through the ceiling of the hangar to get some light beams falling into the scenery. The last environment I needed for the story was a city park where the airship crashes into in the end. It would be dark, so it only needed detail in a very brief radius. A lot of elements like these poles could be spreaded everywhere. The tree was created using the Grove add-on for Blender. The airship needed to be destroyed and set on fire using the smoke simulation system. Wind is deforming the remaining cloth, and it is used as inflow for the fire simulation, and therefore the fire can react to the motion of the cloth. I also created a shader that would slowly burn through the curtains and added a particle system to blow sparks into the air. Another important set piece was the main airship that Victoria and the watchmaker used to depart from Royal Harbour. It is kind of the classic beautiful airship, and I've spent a long time working on it until I was happy. It has a launch area on the lower deck where the passengers hang out and have tea, and when you go upstairs, there are the cabins where you can sit in a private cabin on a longer journey. The cockpit was more inspired by a pirate ship or even a spaceship with a little area to stand on and be able to turn and see to the side as well. Since I found that real airship cockpits did not look very impressive. A steel frame holds the balloon inside. The cabin is attached to the bottom part. Multiple engines are attached to the side of the adjustable wings, and two propellers on the back side drive the airship forwards. To fit inside the hangar, The wings need to be adjusted backwards and would extend again with enough space outside. Would this ship work like this in reality? Probably not, but it was a lot of fun imagining these little details. Later in the story, a bomb blows a hole in the hull and damages the balloon. I adjusted the cloth sim and the balloon and used vertex paint to paint a burnt shader onto the wood. A front wind creates the impression of the curtains being influenced by the outside winds. And then there was the other airship, the one from the pirates, and I'm also very happy how this one turned out. The exterior is inspired by some kind of insect or bug, and it tucks its legs in at takeoff. Also, it should have some kind of harpoon cannon that the pirates will use to board our ships. It could be extended through a hatch. The cockpit got its inspiration more from a submarine, and I wanted it to be narrow and full of instruments. The pilot should not have a steering wheel like in the Hero airship, but use these levers mounted on the ceiling. I placed a hatch on the top part of the cockpit to let light in from above, but also to have light from the inside light up the bottom part of the balloon in the darker shots of the thunderstorm. There were some other vehicles as well, but only briefly be seen, like the steam train or the hot air balloon. Since they don't play a big role, I did not go into too much detail on them. One last thing are the mechanical spiders that we first see spying in the headquarters. There was a basic version that the pirate carried around in her suitcase, and there was a more advanced version with a foldable radar dish on the top. Since this was basically a zero-budget project, the actors were all friends of mine and also myself, and it was a lot of fun to see my friends dress up as characters I had imagined. One of the biggest problems was, where should we shoot all these scenes? I knew that there were no suitable places or buildings around me, if anywhere. So the solution for my vision to come true was going indoors and setting up the green screen, setting up some lights and using a hairdryer to create wind, and this is how we went through shot by shot. With my limited gear, I at least tried to create a light that would roughly match the light that was later on to be seen in the digital world as well. Some assets needed to be built for real, since the actors had to interact with them. First, the weapon that Victoria is using to destroy the mechanical spiders. This was nothing more than an assembly of empty bottles and some spare parts from the hardware store. When fired, it exhausts steam through mounted valves. Next, there was the energy shield that a pest doctor uses. He carries a steam engine on the back that is connected to his shield and produces the energy that is used to power the shield. It first needs to be extended before it unfolds the energy between its arms. I wanted there to be working parts on the backpack and the display spinning around, displaying the produced energy. I did not have the skill to build such an asset for real, so the actor had to wear an empty beer barrel on the back and had a cardboard dummy in his hands. Also needed was the steering wheel on the bridge of the airship. I purchased an old wagon wheel and glued the handles to it, mounted it on a tripod, and that was already it. It fell apart multiple times while shooting and survived just long enough to capture all the needed footage. And then there were the costumes, of course. They were widely assembled by old clothing from the costume box, the actual wardrobe of a good friend of mine, and a lot of accessories bought online. So we had the main costumes for the characters and could also assemble them in different ways for background characters. Heavy makeup was applied, also dirt and battle damage, and some could never show their face anyway. An entire room was clad in green screen, as good as possible to be able to key the background out. The actors had to imagine their surroundings and the situation they are in, and try to react to it accordingly. Let's see how to combine the real actors with the virtual sets. After shooting the live action, the trickiest parts began. Finishing a shot basically consists of 4 steps: keying, tracking, compositing, and rendering. Keying means to remove the green screen from the video, so you can insert your actors into a different background. To match the movement of your virtual camera with the movement of the real camera, you will need to track your camera movement. With the background of your video being only green, there's no data for your tracker to work with, so markers were applied to the green screen to help Blender understand the movements of the camera. If successful, the movement of the virtual background fits the movement of the real foreground, and it looks like both were recorded at the same time. In compositing, the footage gets combined with the background, meaning to match the virtual scene as well as possible with the real footage. The light needs to come from the correct direction, and here it was crucial to have the shots planned ahead, so that we could already shoot with lights being set up while recording the footage. Everything was rendered in Blender's close to real-time engine Eevee. A decision that I would not make today, but back when I started the project it seemed to make sense with all the steam and volume and clouds that I had in mind for the desired steampunk aesthetic. As sometimes there were scenes fully digital without recorded footage of real people. But most of the time I followed the established pipeline of creating and finishing shots. When Victoria and the watchmaker arrive at Royal Harbour, we have a good example of layering all the elements together. First we have the film footage and key out the green screen. After tracking the footage, the virtual camera follows the real camera. In this case, I needed to extend the camera motion since I wanted the camera to further turn along the airship. Other shots were a bit easier since there was no tracking needed, but I just used static footage in a shot with almost no camera movement. The technique learned from the mastermind Ian Hubert is to have the real footage on a plane in the Blender scene instead of combing it in later. As she was a real element in this scene, it was possible to shift the virtual focus in Blender and blur her out while the airship got into focus. When the pirates go into direct combat with Victoria, it becomes quite chaotic, and I wanted to emphasize the movement by showing the smoke trail of the damaged backpack the pest doctor is wearing. I tracked the motion of the tank by hand and parented an inflow for the smoke sim to it, so it would follow the movement. But a bit of cheating was involved to make the perspective work as good as possible. There are many more shots I would like to break down and talk about, since every shot brought individual problems and challenges, but I think that should be it for now. After repeating this process for every single scene, all the costumes, makeup, lighting, shooting, tracking, keying, masking, compositing and rendering, that's it. And this is how I make a movie in Blender.